I'm excited to kick the next conversation to learn about what the state of Connecticut is doing. Peter?
Hi, thanks. My name is Peter Hepburn. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Rutgers University, New York, and a research fellow at the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. One of the several tools that the Eviction Lab developed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic was the eviction tracking system, which was a tool for monitoring eviction filings in real time in jurisdictions around the country. And one of the groups to whom we turned for support and for assistance in finding those data was the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, and in particular, Salmun. So Salmun, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much, Peter, and New America for having us. My name is Salmun Kazerounian. I'm a staff attorney at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, and I am a nerd with some programming skills and very interested in data.
And you've been collecting eviction data in the state of Connecticut for how long now?
We've been collecting it since roughly 2017. Prior to that, the eviction data in the state had a number of the problems that we've heard about. There was no consistency. There were jurisdictions without electronic case files. And even where there were electronic case files, there wasn't a unified system. So as of January 1st, 2017, that's the first time there was really statewide electronic data available. And so we started collecting it at that point. We were basically downloading one-time snapshots of the data to do the type of demographic analysis that was actually inspired by the work of Matthew Desmond in the Eviction Lab. So so that's what we were doing at the time.
And then in response to the pandemic and the sort of shifting landscape of eviction during this crisis, what have you been able to do using those data?
So at the start of the pandemic, I thought it might be useful to, as the Eviction Lab did, start tracking real-time eviction trends. So I wrote a script that basically keeps the data, our local version of the database, fully up to date. So it downloads and parses and imports the data and then manipulates it so that every morning we have a fully up to date database of eviction records that is relatively straightforward to query. And with this, we were able to, for example, make data available to the Eviction Lab so Connecticut could be added to the COVID tracker. Besides that, I would say the first truly effective use of the data during the pandemic came in August to early September, when Connecticut courts began processing previously filed cases again. So the moratoria were preventing most new eviction filings, with notable and unfortunate exceptions. But previously filed cases were starting to move forward again, and the courts were beginning to or threatening to issue executions or removal orders that would allow a marshal to put a family out of their house. So we were able to use our data to generate a list of cases that were essentially teed up for those executions to be issued, and we shared those spreadsheets with the major legal services agencies, 3 major legal services agencies in the state that do housing work, and they divided the list by geography and contacted every tenant household that was at risk of imminently being put out of their homes. So they provided information about the CDC moratorium, which is brand new and people didn't necessarily know about it, and also a copy of the CDC declaration. I heard from several legal aid folks that it was quite effective. The number of callbacks they got were significant, and a couple of folks told me it was the most effective form of outreach that they had done to date, because it was so targeted.
I think that's just such a great example of how like really targeted outreach to the places and the people in most need like can be effective, and that there's the capacity to pull it off if the data are there. like that just knowing where you need to expend those efforts is so critically important to doing this well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like if you're trying to reach the people who not only are at the greatest risk, but who you can help. So that there is a tool that can assist this person, then I think obviously that's better than just like sending out blanket information about people's rights to every single tenant, which probably doesn't have a huge effect.
I wanted to talk too about sort of like the longer term use of these data and sort of what you see their potential or how you envision their potential both for legal work and for advocacy work moving forward.
Sure. So I'll start with the advocacy work. The data have actually been quite useful in advocating for various policies and legislation. And to give an exciting example, there's a growing movement in Connecticut to guarantee legal representation as a right to all tenants facing eviction. So in support of that campaign, we were able to generate good data on everything from basic facts like the percentage of tenants with counsel and the percentage of landlords with counsel, to more granular information that sort of shows the impact of having an attorney on the outcome of a case. And that data has been used to lobby legislators. It's been used in the media. It's been sort of widely reported. And yesterday, actually, the Connecticut House of Representatives passed a right to counsel bill, and the governor has already announced that he intends to allocate $10 million a year over the next couple of years, which should be sufficient to guarantee a lawyer to most tenants.
Which would make it only the second state to guarantee the right to counsel in eviction cases.
I think a couple of other states passed legislation this session. But and I'm not sure precisely where they are in the process, whether the legislation's been signed, but that's, it's very exciting.
And then there's also a way that these data could be used for making kind of broader Fair Housing Act claims, right?
Right. So actually, this is what we had in mind initially back in 2017, and stuff happened, so we haven't actually completed this project, but our intent is to build a disparate impact case based on eviction record screening. So basically, when someone applies for an apartment, we've heard a couple references to tenant screening already today, but when someone applies for an apartment, background check is typically done, and if there's an eviction in someone's history, very often that just leads to blacklisting without looking at sort of details about whether that eviction case actually shows that a tenant, or gives any information about whether a tenant would be able right now to meet the obligations of their tenancy. So as the Eviction Lab has demonstrated, people of color and women are significantly likelier to face eviction. And as a consequence of that, any sort of screening policy that limits access to housing based on an eviction record has a disproportionate effect on families of color and women. And that, the analysis doesn't end there. Without getting too into the weeds, landlord would be able to survive a challenge like that by showing that the policy is justified, that there is a non-discriminatory substantial justification for the policy. And if someone's eviction rate, let's say someone's eviction was withdrawn or dismissed, I think a landlord would have a hard time showing that that there's a justified basis for using that eviction as the basis for denial. So we're building that case, and yeah.
Terrific. I mean, I think that's points to both how these data can be used in the immediate short term, but then can also be critical in answering some of the bigger questions that could lead us to reform how we think about how eviction can and should be used, and how accessible it should be for landlords. think we should probably turn and leave some time here for some Q&A. So I'll hand it back to Lauren.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Peter and Salmun. I particularly liked your point about targeted outreach. With data, we're able to have targeted outreach and reach those in greatest